I'm Elizabeth Adams here with Cass Grafton for the author to author interview series with Austen Through the Ages. So Cass, welcome.
Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you at last.
Lovely to meet you too. You've been on my radar for a while and we've just, for whatever reason, never connected. So like, yay, meeting over Zoom as everybody did in 2020. So it's very appropriate. Yeah. But anyway, so I wanted to talk to you today about your book series what do you call the series, the time traveling series? Does the series itself have its own name?
The publishers gave it a name. They call it the Austen Adventures.
Oh, the Austen Adventures. I like that. It sounds so Indiana Jones.
No, yeah, we haven't given her a whip yet.
Oh God, wouldn't that be, okay, now I'm getting ideas. That would be hysterical. So if you are not familiar, Cass Grafton wrote this book with Ada Bright called The Particular Charm of Miss Jane Austen. And it has a super cute cover, which I've got in black and white on my Kindle, so I'm not going to show it here, but I'll try to grab a picture of it and throw it up on the video later. But this is a book about Jane Austen herself traveling forward in time to meet a couple of original characters. Yeah. So what I want to know is, firstly, where on earth did you get this idea? Because this is so interesting. And what, like, did you just like have a secret fantasy that you wanted Jane Austen to come forward and meet you, and that's where you got the idea for this book?
No, it's even more strange than that.
Oh God, no, I'm all ears.
Okay, I stayed in, there was a few years back, 4 Sydney Place in Bath, which is, I'm sure any Jane Austen fan knows, was once a home that Jane Austen lived in. A holiday letting company took it over. So there were 4 apartments in the building, 1 on each floor. And I happened to stay in the ground floor apartment for a few nights, just because why wouldn't you? You know, you're walking in a house Jane Austen walked in, you know. So I stayed there a couple of nights. And something very strange happened on the first night. There was some, the ground floor, there was a sort of drawing room at the front and then a door into the bedroom at the back. Mm-hmm. And there's no lock on the door at all. It's just a round handle. And so I went to bed on the first night, shut the door between the two, went to sleep, got up in the morning, couldn't open the door. I couldn't open the door into the drawing room. And I couldn't go out because I was only there for 2 nights. I'd got 1 pair of shoes with me, which was in the drawing room.
Oh, God.
So luckily I had my phone with me. But I contacted the holiday company and said, and I could get out of the bedroom through another door, but I couldn't get into the drawing room. So I couldn't leave the apartment.
To get your shoes.
So I called them and said, you know, this has happened. They said, oh, that's never happened before. We'll send someone round. But I, of course, being a writer, I'm sat there thinking, I wonder why it won't open if it's never happened before.
Clearly, it was the ghost of Jane Austen locking you in your room.
No, it wasn't. No, not the ghost. It was Jane Austen. I was convinced that she'd come through time because she was living in Bath, you know, in the early 1800s, and that she just slipped through time and was in their front parlour or whatever it was. And when she's there, the door won't open. So that was my theory, because they turned up and they managed to get it open, and they couldn't explain why, because there was no lock. But that was where the original seed of thought came, that she'd come forward into 20th century Bath, as it was at the time, 21st century Bath.
That is an awesome story, and that is such a great glimpse into the mind of a writer, because I do the same thing. I'll have like this weird experience and I'm like, oh, what if? And then the next thing you know, book. It's crazy. So how did Ada, your co-writer, come into all of this?
Well, Ada and I have spent many, many years. We've known each other 19 years. And when we first met, we did a little bit of co-writing together, just standalone short stories and bits and pieces. We both just discovered we had a love of a lot of the similar things. Right. And we both loved to write. We'd never written anything ourselves particularly, but we thought, should we try doing a bit of writing together? It would be fun.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a challenge because Ada's in California, and at the time I was living in Connecticut. So we had a sort of 6-hour time difference. But anyway, so we used to do that. We used to write short stories together. Initially in the Harry Potter fandom. And then we moved over we realised we both loved Jane Austen. So we started doing a bit of co-writing in the Jane Austen side of things. And then I went off and did writing of my own with Jane Austen, and we left it. But we always said to each other that one day we wanted to co-write a book. So when I had this idea, I went to her with it and said, what do you think about this? And I've got a few other ideas since then about it, because I'd actually had, I'd interviewed the director of the company renting out the apartments, and he told me all about the, when they renovated the building and turned it into holiday lets. And that fed into the story as well, because there were some facts in our book that came from that. So
I read that in the back of the book. You had some like real thoughts, or real facts about it that inspired it, which was so fascinating to me to read.
Yeah. So yeah, she was like, yeah, let's go for it. Let's try it. But by then I was living here in Switzerland, so we then had a 9-hour time difference. But that actually helped us. Is it not
more? Yeah, I would have thought it was 10, but yes. Oh my gosh, that's interesting.
It's 9, but what helped us was that time difference, because we're very different people. And Ada's very much a night person, a night owl, and I'm an early bird. So when I get up in the morning and I sit at my desk, it's late at night there, her kids are in bed, and she's at her brightest, I'm at my brightest, and that works, So
that worked out perfectly then. That's so crazy. I love it. So in your book, you have these 2 characters who are friends who meet on a fandom and then meet in real life. So is that inspired by you and Ada? Because it kind of sounds like it is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, we brought our geekiness into the book in terms of things that they liked. Yeah, we did. Yeah.
So which one are you? That's what everybody wants to know. Are you the bubbly American or the serious it's English woman?
Fairly obvious who is who. I mean, they're not entirely us, obviously, but I don't think it's difficult to work out.
Yeah. Well, I've actually not met Ada, so I could have been wrong about my guess.
If you'd ever heard my attempt at an American accent, you definitely know it wasn't me.
Oh, now I'm dying to hear it. That would be funny. But yeah, that sounds like so much fun. So with the co-writing process, I know you get asked about this a lot, but I think a lot of people are probably curious about it. Is there a very strict division of labor? Is there you write this character and I write this character, kind of like people who do screenplays do, or is it just, and whatever happens?
Yeah, it's a bit like that, really. Yes, it's we don't. It's a bit like that. We both work on every aspect of the book. We both. Okay. It gets to a point at the end where we will be praising each other for lines, and then the other will be going, "Yeah, you wrote that." It's like you forget what you wrote because we're working on all of it. So usually we'll brainstorm. I say, well, I'll get up in the morning, it's late at night, we'll brainstorm, say, right, what's got to happen next? What are we going to do next? And we'll have like a little list at the top of the chapter. These things need to happen. And so I'll start writing. She'll go to bed, and then in the afternoon, I've finished. I send to her what I've done. She gets up. And then she doesn't usually work on it till the evening because she's got 3 children and she's busy in the day, but it works really well for us. By the time I get up the next morning, she's done her bit. So one of us will put it down on paper, the other will then work on it, then the other one will polish it, and then the other one will add a few words to it. And it's just like we just create it like that, and that's how we do it. So
that sounds so lovely and so ideal. And I can't help but think, I don't know that I could do that.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that, I mean, you might find this interesting, that before we started to write, we said that our friendship was far more important than writing this book together. And we made an unwritten contract with each other that if ever it got to the point where it was going to make us fall out, the book was in the bin. Yeah. Because our friendship was more important, and we made that pact with each other, and we never went anywhere near it, but we did make that pact right from the start.
I love that. I think that's really important, that the person is more important, the relationship is more important than the manuscript. I mentioned in our pre-interview that I've been writing a story with a friend, and we said something similar because I'd had a bad experience in the past with co-writing, and so we both just said, like, I really like you, you really like me, we're friends, that's more important. So if this gets hairy, just drop it. Like it's not worth it. So I'm glad. That makes me feel a little bit better they did that. So how many books have you and Ada written together?
We've co-written 3. We've
Are
2 of
they
them are
all?
yeah.
Okay, so they're not all in the same series.
No, we've
They're only-
written 2 of the time travel.
Okay.
There's a 3rd one to come because there's a story arc running across the 2 that is all going to come out in the 3rd one.
So there's a 3rd Austen Adventures.
It's plotted. We've plotted it out. We just haven't started writing it yet.
Oh, that's exciting.
Ada will tell you, if you'd asked Ada that question, she'd say, yeah, there's another 10 to come, but there's actually only 1 to come. we have this pretend argument a lot. And then we've just, last year, in our mutual lockdowns, we were both writing contemporary novels at the time, our own projects. And when the lockdown came, we both just couldn't focus on them, couldn't really push them forward. We didn't want to write about the situation we were in our stories, so we just said, should we just head back to the past? And we weren't, as I say, the thing with the time travel is it does involve the present day. So we just decided to write a Jaff novel, and I'd had an idea many years ago for a crossover between Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion. So I again said to Ada, what do you think of this? And she went, yeah, I'm up for it, let's go for it. So Mr. Darcy's Persuasion, which came out in March, was our lockdown co-write novel.
Okay, so tell me about this book, because I literally know absolutely nothing about this book. I saw the title, Mr. Darcy's Persuasion. I assumed it was a crossover between Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion. It's kind of a dead giveaway, but I literally know nothing about it. So tell me a little bit about this book.
Okay, so it follows the timeline of Pride and Prejudice. It begins immediately after the Netherfield Ball in November 1811. Therefore, for the characters in Persuasion, it's 3 years earlier than Persuasion is set. So Anne Elliot, for example, is 24, not 27.
And she's been alone now 5 years instead of 8 years.
Yes,
right?
Not 8. Yes. And Captain Wentworth is away at sea on his ship, the Laconia.
Okay.
So that's the situation. We have 2 things that sort of trigger the story off. Darcy, when he leaves Netherfield after the ball, decides to head to the West Country because Georgiana's not been very well. He wants to spend the winter in a milder climate, and it is milder there. And just happens to be he's met Sir Walter Elliot in town before now, and Sir Walter offers him a property on the Kellynch estate in Somerset.
Oh my gosh, I thought you were going to say Sir Walter offered him his daughter. So like, please no. Okay, crisis averted. Keep going.
I'm not commenting on that. I'm not commenting.
Oh God, no.
So anyway, so Mr. Darcy and his sister are in the West Country on the Kellynch estate. Now, Anne Elliot, as you know, Charlotte Lucas's father, Sir William, is very proud of the fact he's been presented at St. James's, and I felt that he and Sir Walter probably would have, had a mutual admiration for each other, and therefore they would know each other. So therefore, I thought that Anne may have known Charlotte. So as it happened, Anne comes to stay with Charlotte at the same time that Mr. Darcy's headed away from Netherfield, and she and Elizabeth become good friends. And when Anne leaves, she invites Elizabeth to come back with her for a few weeks to stay at Kellynch. So they arrive at Kellynch, and of course Mr. Darcy's there, and so on.
So kind of replacing Hunsford with Kellynch.
Yes.
Okay, so here's a question that you don't have to answer. So does Charlotte end up with Mr. Collins?
No.
Okay. That makes my heart so happy. Okay, so now I'm super curious about this book. Now I'm going to have to read it. Here's what I was afraid this book was. I was afraid it was not a crossover. I was afraid it was the Persuasion story replaced with Mr. Darcy, because some people do that, and I hate that. And that's just my personal opinion, not bashing those authors, but it's so tortured, and it's
I'd never thought of that. I'd never thought of that.
Don't do it. It's super annoying, but I'm sure there are plenty of people who love it, and to everybody who loves it, I'm sorry. It's just my personal opinion. But I don't like that, because it's like, I feel like the Pride and Prejudice story is tortured enough, and now you want to separate them for years and years and years? Seriously? Like, she already ripped his heart out and did a Mexican hat dance on it. Like, do we have to torture them more? So I'm very relieved to hear. So do we get any Captain Wentworth sightings in this book for those of us who like a man in uniform?
You will get plenty of him, but I have to be a bit cagey about how he arrives and why he arrives, because you've got to bear in mind that he's actually away at sea at the moment. So I have to be a bit cagey about that. But all I will say is, I think Ada and I both had a very lovely year last year with spending it with Mr. Darcy and Captain Wentworth.
Well, I know what I'll be spending my afternoon with. Now I'm going to be with Darcy and Wentworth together. Makes my heart so happy, because they're my two favorite heroes. Because I love Darcy for everything he does, and he's so mysterious. I think that's part of the reason people like him, because we don't actually know him that well. So you can kind of fill in the blanks with whatever your dream guy is. You can just put that on him. And I think that's a big part of his popularity. And of course, we love Elizabeth, so we love someone who has the sense to love the person that we love. But I think his biggest draw is that he's, willing to change and willing to mature and all of that we see him kind of in process. But what I love about Captain Wentworth is completely different, that he's kind of like a completed person. We don't meet him so much in process. And he's so realistic to me. Like, I feel like I know people like him, and he's not always the nicest guy. He's kind of vindictive. He's kind of a jerk. But they have noticed that a lot of Austen's guys start out as jerks. So she was real big on showing that people are more than just the one thing, But there's something so very realistic, viscerally real about Wentworth, that I've often wondered if she wrote him after a real person, because he does feel so very real. But anyway, he's one of my favorites. I absolutely love him. And oh my God, that letter, that half agony, half hope line, like, it just gets me every time.
I personally believe that Persuasion was very close to Jane writing her own story in a way. And I because I've always wondered, she wrote all those books, but that's the only one she just put in a drawer and didn't publish.
Yeah.
And
you're not the only one who thinks that.
There was allegedly a romance at the seaside, and the person died. So they never, he was supposed to come back, and then they later heard he died. There's nothing in Cassandra's letters, so they're obviously in destroyed letters. And I just think this idea of getting that second chance with a love you lost years ago, I just think she was writing, I like to think she was writing a story for herself. She was writing herself the ending she wished she could have.
Yeah, that's so sad. That's very sad. But it is it's such a heart-wrenching story, the original story. And I feel so much for all the characters in that story. Well, not all of them. I don't feel any sympathy for Sir Walter. I don't like him, but he's such a pompous bore.
You're going to like him less if you read the book.
Will I love to hate him? Is it one of those?
Hope so. I hope so.
Sometimes it's nice to have a good villain, because you just get a good mad on. You can channel all your anger towards this person, and then you don't yell at your husband because you're mad at the book. So it's better to channel your energy.
Yeah.
So okay. So you have this Persuasion one is also with Ada, and then you have the two time travel books with Ada. So what do you have on your own? You mentioned that you have other novels that you've written on your own.
Yeah. I wrote the first thing I published was a Jaff novel that I'd actually posted online many years earlier, and it was such a long story. It was so long, and I'd never published anything. So I thought, well, all I was doing it for was I'd had a couple of major things happened in my life. One was I turned 50, and 4 years before that I'd been diagnosed with cancer, and it sort of makes you think twice about the future, and I'd always wanted to write a book, and I thought, well, I wrote this thing and I posted it online, and it took 4 years because there was the cancer in the middle of it, so I stopped for 2 years, and I thought it was a really long story, but I thought, well, I'd like to see it on my bookshelf. It might be the only thing I ever see on my bookshelf with my name on.
Yeah.
Not expecting people to buy it, because everyone had read it online anyway for free. So I just didn't think of sales. I just thought, So I split it into 3 volumes, so that it was a normal book size, because it's massive. It's 240,000 words. So
Wait, what book is this?
a
What's
fair
the name of?
prospect. A fair prospect.
I have read this. I read that online. I did not realize that was you. Oh my gosh.
was me.
I know the book you're talking about, because when I think you published around the same time that I published my first book, because we were always right next to each other on Amazon. And I remember the cover, and I was like, who is this? And then I read the beginning of the book, and I was one of the people who read it online. I read it on a forum.
Those original covers, the pen and ink drawing covers, were done by Ada and her mother. They did those covers.
Crazy. That's so cool. So yes, I have read that book, and it was really good. Well done, you.
That was the first one, and then I didn't bring another Jaff out till 2017, and that was A Quest for Mr. Darcy, which was set in Derbyshire. I really enjoyed writing that because I love Derbyshire.
I love how you say Derbyshire, set in Derbyshire. So nice. I love it. My American accent, we're like Derbyshire. Like, it's so not special. You make it sound so much fancier. Oh, good grief. So I am so excited that there's another book. So I'm just going to fangirl for a quick minute on your time travel series, because I just read this book. So apparently I have read Cass before, didn't know it, but I had never read the time travel book because I actually had no idea what it was about. I saw the cover. I thought it was cute looking, like the cover itself was very pretty, but I had no idea what it was about. And I just, for whatever reason, had never read it. And then before this interview, I read the book so we would have something to talk about. And I got so hooked that I ended up waking up in the middle of the night, like my cat woke me up or something, and I couldn't go back to sleep. And I had gotten like, I don't know, 20% in. And before that, and by the time the night was done, I only had like 5 chapters left to go, because I read from like 2:30 in the morning to like 6, just in bed on my Kindle reading. My husband woke up and he was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Shh." It's the good part. So if you haven't read it yet, get it. You know how picky, those of you who know me know that I'm like the most picky person. It's ridiculous. I don't recommend things often, but I would highly, highly, highly recommend this book. I loved it so much. It was so fun. And I really love time travel books. I have a whole set of like the time travel books I read when I was a kid. I read them a lot when I was a teenager, like where she goes into like a root cellar and then she comes out and it's 50 years earlier or something. I loved those books. So this one, when I started the book, I wasn't sure where you were going because I didn't recognize any of the characters, and I did not read the blurb. Full disclosure, I did not read the blurb. I didn't know what I was reading. So I saw a particular charm of Miss Jane Austen. I knew it had something to do with time travel. So I was like, okay, I like time travel. I'll probably like the book. But I thought that these people were going to travel back into Jane Austen's time or something. And so when I'm like the first part of the book, nobody's going anywhere. And I was like, what is happening? Like, I don't understand what's happened. Like, I should have read the blurb. That's my fault. So I didn't know what I was looking for. But then
we did drop a few hints.
I got a couple of little hints as we went along, but I wasn't sure if I was just reading into it, because sometimes, you know, like when you buy a red car, suddenly you start seeing red cars everywhere. When before you were like, oh, I'm special, nobody else has a red car, and now everybody has a red car. So I wasn't sure if I was just seeing what I wanted to see or if it was like actually there. So I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read it yet, but and there's something I want to ask you about one of the characters in that book. But there were all these guys, like this plethora of men in the book that I couldn't figure out, like, is he Darcy-esque, or is he actually a jerk? And is this guy representing Wickham? Like, I was way overthinking it. And so anyway, I loved it once. It like, I liked it in the beginning, but once I got to like 15% through on the Kindle, so I don't know what chapter that is, but I was so hooked that I went from liking it to like ignoring my children. And so it was a whole different level of liking the book. But anyway, it was so fun. It was so like just ridiculously fun and crazy, because if this is a spoiler, I will cut this out. So you tell me whether or not, when she sees she has the experience where she sees a world without Jane Austen. So did you go into that thinking, I want to show the world how important books are and authors are? Or was that just like a happy side effect? Because I got that majorly. I started thinking, oh my God, what would my life be like if I had never read Little Women? If Louisa May Alcott never existed? Because that book was so important to me as a developing girl. And I read everything Lucy Maud Montgomery published under Ellen Montgomery, who famously wrote the Anne of Green Gables series, which I've read the entire series literally probably 10 times at least. I could quote every single one of her books. And she had such a huge impact on me as a person, forming into the person I am. And so I just started thinking, oh my God, what if these amazing authors weren't there? So was that a happy accident, or did you go into it thinking that you wanted to make that point?
It was a little bit of both, in that we were very conscious of the fact that Rose, who's our sort of lead character,
Mm-hmm.
that her life had been completely altered by the fact that she was
Yeah.
a massive Jane Austen fan. It had impacted her on so many different levels, and even, as you know, having read the book, practical levels, like where she worked and where she lived
Right.
and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that we were very aware of. What surprised us as we wrote it was the funny little details in life that changed, like a friend not being called Elizabeth because
Yes.
her mum was an Elizabeth Bennet fan, and she named her Elizabeth because of that. And so now she's got a different name. And so, yeah, it is a bit personal in that all my passwords have some sort of Jane Austen connection. So I'll use
Okay.
dates and names and mix them up and so on. So, of course, Rose did the same, and therefore had to change passwords for everything. She couldn't get into anything. So it's those little things, people naming
Yeah.
their pet Darcy. Now it's not called Darcy anymore. All those things
Yeah.
would change. So it was the
Yeah.
levels that affected people that surprised us, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I have a friend who did name her daughter Eliza from
Mhm.
Pride and Prejudice. And yeah, that's interesting that those tiny little details would be changed. And even Rose's success at her job, not just the job itself, but part of why she was so successful in her job was that she capitalized on her Austen connections to help her business grow.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting to see her lack of confidence without it. And for me personally, it just highlighted how important literature is, especially I think to women. I mean, it definitely is to men as well, but I think it especially is to women because we've led more interior lives for so long. You flip through any history book and you'll find story after story after story about this man did this and this monarch or this general or this, woohoo man did all these things. You will not find that about women. And you have to really go looking for it. You have to hunt out the stories about women. Where you will find women is in literature. And so I think it's so important to show the life. That's really the only way, in a mainstream way, without being a detective, without hunting it out, to just walk into your library. If you want to find out how women lived 200 years ago, you're not going to find it in a history book, a mainstream history book. You're going to find it in a novel. And that's so important. I couldn't get past that in the book. When I read that, I was like, that is genius. Like genius, almost on an almost diabolical level. I was like, and I felt like almost horrified that it had happened, because I was like, what if that really happened? Oh my God. I had a little bit of a freak out, reading in the dark, So it's really fascinating. So for those of you who have not read the book, read it, and it all does end well. It does not end on a horrifying note, and it's hilarious and so clever and so smart and so many interesting little tidbits tied together that I found so amusing, and how a person's life would shift if you're a fan of time travel or a fan of the sliding doors kind of theory, that what if this one thing was changed, how many other things would be changed. And I liked the thread of destiny that you kind of wove in there, that she still met a lot of the same people. They were still in her life, just in a different capacity or maybe in a different time. But I loved the idea of a destined friendship. I thought that was sweet, because I think so often we think destiny is only about romance. But I think sometimes, or not sometimes, often, the most important relationships in our lives are our really close friendships. So I love that these girls, these friends, were destined for each other. And that was
Yeah.
really sweet. I loved that about it. Was that, well, I know you've already said it's kind of like a reflection of that, but like, do you do that on purpose? Because I always wonder, do writers go into it thinking, I want to make this point? Or does it just happen? And then they're like, oh, look, I just made an awesome statement about friendship. I didn't know I was doing that.
No, the thing is, the overall idea, and certainly that first book, is very much about friendship. And as you've already said, it's clear that the friendship between myself and Ada is reflected in it.
Yeah.
And we had so much fun writing it. We just had so much fun. And it was just a joyous thing. We just wanted people to get to the end of the book and say, well, that was a great ride. You know, that's all it was about, really.
Well, you succeeded. That's what, at the end of the book, I went, oh, that's great. And I messaged you and I was like, I loved it. And I, you know, and then you were like, well, then you'll love, there's the sequel. And I was like, there's a sequel? I was like, I'm so excited. So yeah, that's
yes, it is.
I love it.
It's very much about friendship. There's a hint of romance in that first book.
Yeah.
The romance is more to the fore in the second book, but it's still very much about female friendship. And funnily enough, although this wasn't the intention, when we wrote Mr. Darcy's Persuasion, we discovered that Elizabeth Bennet and Anne Elliot was a friendship we didn't know we needed, but actually it was fabulous. It went beautifully. So
yeah. I think it is. I have also been toying with a Persuasion, Pride and Prejudice crossover. And I felt the same thing, that I think Elizabeth and Anne would be really good for each other. I think they would make great friends. I completely agree about that. And tell me if this is just me, but I find that as I get older, I want less about, in the books, I want the central relationship to be less about romance and more about friendship. And am I the only one who like has progressed in this way as I go through my reading?
I don't know. It feels, for me now it feels very natural. I'm a lot older than you. It feels very natural to me now.
But like when I was younger, when I was in like my early 20s, I liked the central relationship to be the romance. And that also reflected my life, that my central relationship was meeting my husband and getting married and all of that jazz. But now I've been married 16 years and I'm in my late 30s, and I enjoy books about friendship more because I understand that your whole life is not about this one romantic relationship, and thinking that it is a very youthful, naive notion. I guess that's what I'm kind of getting at. So I like books that have the romance, obviously, given how I write, but I also really love to see a strong friendship, a strong female friendship. It's just more fulfilling to me personally to read a book like that. It feels more like a whole story, like a whole person, you know? So I personally like that. And I loved that about this. I cannot say enough good things. I loved this story so much. I wish I could get my 15-year-old daughter to read it because I think she would like it, but she doesn't do anything I suggest. So maybe I'll get my husband to suggest it. She listens to him more.
Yeah, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And I think you're right. As I sit here listening to you talk, I think you are right. I think when I look back, it was all about the romance for me in my younger days, in my 20s, and almost my 30s too. And then, but now certainly I like romance in books. I mean, I think every book has romance in it. Even thrillers have romance in it.
Yeah.
That, you know, they're always there in the background somewhere, you know. But yeah, it was just such a joy to write with a friend.
Yeah, I can imagine writing a great book about friends with a friend. Like, how awesome is that? So that makes me feel hopeful for the project I'm attempting on the side, that it will go well. Fingers crossed. But anyway, I will stop fangirling about your book now, and so we can put a nice little bow on this. Is there anything that you wanted to add?
No, not at all. It's been lovely. It's been lovely to talk to you, and really nice to meet you at last. So
yes, you too. I can't believe it's been this long that I haven't met you. Like, how did that happen? I've met so many people, and I don't know. I've even traveled to Switzerland multiple times because I have a really close friend who's also English, who lived in Switzerland for like 11 years. And so I've gone to visit her many times and never thought to message you and be like, hey, random stranger, want to grab a coffee? Which I totally do, by the way.
That's such a shame. And now we're leaving.
I know, it's so funny. Like, it's crazy. But anyway, so thank you so much for having the conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I'm Elizabeth Adams. This is Cass Grafton. This has been Author to Author through Austen Through the Ages. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.